Movies could be very much like archaeology. You dig through and dig through tons of movies and hundreds of them every year, maybe even more than that. And eventually you do find that hidden treasure, that X marks the spot. You find that hidden gem. So much so that even this year, the top 10 movies I've seen, 4 of them have been of the independent variety. Now, after watching Room, I'm happy to say that the top 10, top 5, nay, my top 3 welcomes a new member. Another episode of The Real Mentor. As always, my goal to enhance your movie watching experience. Now, before we get started, you might notice I have a Star Wars poster, particularly Darth Vader up there, which doesn't really quite match the movie I watched. But there's a reason why I have this up here. I am gonna connect this movie to this particular franchise. Bear with me. So, Room. I saw this movie about 5 days ago, more or less, and I waited on actually giving out a review on it, particularly because I am going to highly recommend this right off the bat, but I wanted to be sure for the right reasons. Now, specifically, what I'll get into a little bit later, there's a connection, personal connection I have with this movie. And sometimes when you have a personal connection with a particular movie, you tend to overhype it. And especially when it's potential someone not being able to make that connection. But this is legitimately a great movie from a technical standpoint and from many facets. That much I can legitimately say. And I wanted to be sure I could articulate that prior to giving a knee-jerk reaction to seeing a movie, which is easy to do. Now, what was interesting is that out of all the screenings I've seen over the last few months, this was the only one where at the end of the movie, the crowd was clapping. There was genuine love for this movie. A lot of people were talking about it. I could hear them. A lot of emotion in this flick. And so I knew right away what I watched was indeed a great movie. I wasn't too concerned about recommending it to you guys after the fact. Now, this review is going to be quite difficult because, when you recommend a movie, you want to give the reasons as to why. Now, the reasons I'm going to give in a second are more from a personal standpoint. And because at the end of the day, this is a movie that should not be spoiled. And talking about a couple of key plot points may ruin the experience, particularly because this movie is almost divided in two. You have the first half where obviously the connections being made with the characters. There's an air of mystery there. You're trying to figure out exactly what's going on. And then the second half where you see the aftermath of the circumstances the main two characters go through. And it's hard to talk about one, not the other, or talk about one about having to reveal why it lent itself to that result. There is a huge emotional payoff at the end of the movie, and it's some things that are better left unsaid, and I think I myself went in pretty blindly. You'll be better off the same way. Now, Room stars Brie Larson, in particular, who we've seen mainly in 21 Jump Street. This is her biggest mainstream movie. She was recently in Short Term 12, which is a great independent flick. And let me tell you something right now, her performance reeks of Oscar. I mean, if she doesn't get at least nominated, I'm gonna be pissed because she killed it. She demonstrates such great acting chops in this flick, running through the gambit of emotions in here. Any parent out there, particularly mothers, you're gonna make that connection with her and relate to her instantly. She is fantastic in this movie. Probably one of the best performances, male or female, the entire year. Now, not to be shortchanged is Jacob Tremblay, her co-star in this movie, the 5-year-old kid playing her son, who, in my opinion, and many others who have seen the movie, I can honestly say it's been the best performance by a child that I've seen ever, easily the last 10, 15 years. But again, maybe ever in my opinion. This kid is fantastic. He's so natural on the screen. There's a range of emotions that he goes through. You really feel for him, connect with him. And it's so simple. And it's hard not to fall in love with this kid. There's a particular scene towards the end, which I won't spoil, but it involves his hair, which is honestly probably the sweetest, most endearing scene I've seen all year. It's gonna bring out the tears of most of you guys out there. This movie will do that. This movie will try its hardest. It'll tug at you. It tries to get those tears out. Now, for me, it didn't work because man card regulations strictly stipulate I'm unable to do so in the movie. But other people were crying in the theater. There's a lot of guys in there doing the old, I got something in my eye routine, pretending they weren't really crying. But I know better. You can fool your girlfriends, but you can't fool the real mentor. You guys were crying, I know it. Now, here comes my Star Wars tie-in, at least one of them anyway. Jacob Tremblay is so good in this film that he is strongly rumored to play a young Jedi in Episode 9 of this upcoming Star Wars trilogy. Now that just shows how much confidence they have in him, his abilities. So it's kind of interesting to see going from Room and now tying it back into one of my favorite franchises of all time, Star Wars. So let me get back on track. Now Room, I'm gonna give you just a little taste, a nugget of what this movie is about and what makes it so interesting, particularly early on. Now, Brie Larson's character, obviously her son, Jacob Tremblay, they've been living together, just them two, for the past 5 years. He's been raising them on her own. But what makes it even more interesting is the circumstances of which he's been raising them. For the last 5 years, they've been living in, of course, a room. So now this room is basically about 10 by 10. It has a bathtub, it has the bed, and small little kitchenette, the table, and a TV, and that's virtually all. There is a skylight which provides some lighting in the daytime, and that's all. And they've been in that room for 5 years, and she's been raising him under those conditions. The child has never seen anything else, knows nothing else but that and what her mother tells him. Now you really get to see that connection that's building between them throughout that time. And the kid is virtually left to just his imagination to survive and to make things the best possible. So now this movie doesn't necessarily take place just in the room. Eventually the kid is exposed to the outside world for the very first time. Now imagine how you feel 5 years in a room and now exposed to things you've never seen before. And it's interesting because it is told through the eyes of the child for the most part. And he's even narrating what he's seeing for the first time, what he's experiencing, and his feelings about everything, which is fascinating because it's some of the same things we'd be thinking at that same age. And a lot of times, you grow up, you get very jaded, and you forget how it is to be a kid again. And this movie kind of reminds you, it kind of puts you in that place once again. And it's fascinating to see that develop through the last half of the movie, how he reacts to the people, and how he even reacts to a simple thing like a staircase. Now, the reason why I really love this movie in particular is the connection, like I mentioned earlier, the connection I had with this movie. Now, particularly with the kid. This kid goes through the movie despite the difficult circumstances, and he's surviving just by the nature of his imagination, particularly early on. Now, when he's describing what he's seeing and all that, really brings me back to when I was a kid and really puts you in his shoes. And for myself, it's my childhood, most childhoods, that's probably your most fond memories, and anything that takes you back to that, it's gonna make you feel good. Now, I myself was a shy kid. I was always playing and alone. I had my G.I. Joes and Transformers and whatever, creating my own scenarios and all that. And it was my imagination that got me through. I'm a kid at heart. So every time I see something that brings me back to that, I can't help but smile. Now, it's almost the same reason, I'm going back to my Star Wars theme here. There's a reason why grown men get the chills or cry when I see a trailer. Not myself, of course, but when I see the trailer for the newest movie. This movie, Star Wars, is great. It's fun, lightsabers and space battles and special effects. Oh, and that's great. Chewie, Han, wonderful. But the real reason why people still dress up and get excited over something that happened 30, 35 years ago is because of the nostalgia factor. They grew up, I grew up with Star Wars. And there's always that connection as a kid, and people may not understand that or say, why can people dress up? It doesn't make any sense. It's because that connection makes you feel like a kid again, makes you feel good sitting down here for 2 hours and watch a movie and you sit there like a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old, a 10-year-old and experiencing for the first time, and that wonder that you had back in the day all of a sudden comes back, which is why most parents, they share their kids because they want the kids to have the same experiences. And a lot of fathers who are big into Star Wars and they're shoving Star Wars down their throats, for good or for bad, because they want to experience the same thing and grow up the same way we did. Even me myself, I don't have any kids, but I had my niece and I was a big horror movie fan, and I kind of wanted her to kind of experience the same thing. So she's 6, 7 years old, and what do? I sit her down next to me on the couch at nighttime, and we put on Halloween because it's one of my personal all-time favorites, and I wanted her to experience the same thing I did. Yeah, she was a little young, and her mother didn't approve, but whatever. But she loved it, and to this day, she's almost 21. Her favorite genre is the horror movies, and we talk about horror movies, and she still goes out and watches them. And I like to think, for her, I think it's because that connection she has with that genre, seeing that, being exposed to that as a young kid, is that connection that you have. And for me, this movie had the same thing. It brought me back to that place. Now, I understand that everyone's gonna feel that way, but again, that notwithstanding, this is a great movie. But for myself, that connection that was made was fantastic. Now, having said all that, and talking about childhood memories and all that, make no mistake, this is a dark movie at times. There are moments of elation. It's very emotional, sometimes disturbing, no question about it. So it's not a family film. Don't make that mistake. I know it's a child in it. It's the whole thing imagination. That's just part of the subtext of this movie. It's not what the movie's about, but it is a great film for all these particular reasons. Now, for me, I love recommending a great movie. And this is why I'm here talking to you guys, recommending, hey, go see this, go see that. Particularly these small unknown films. It's easier to talk about, Star Wars and the Martian movies. You're probably going to hear about and maybe watch despite what anybody says, myself and any other reviewer. But it's these movies that you guys don't hear about. And I love sharing those. I love people coming back and telling me, oh man, that was a great movie, man. Thanks for the recommendation. Particularly this year, movies like Predestination, Ex Machina, and obviously this one that have come out, no one's really heard about, very few people have. People come back and tell me, dude, those are some great movies, and it makes me feel good recommending those. Last year, movies like Snowpiercer and Whiplash, which I thought were the best movie of last year, was a couple of the movies that I really love recommending, and this one's on par with the other ones. This movie you should definitely watch. It's a small flick. It may not be out in theaters. You may find it at certain locations. Make it a point to see if you can find it. You obviously will find it down the road and video on demand, Netflix, potentially. Watch this flick. You're gonna thank me for it. You're gonna sit down saying, man, Real Mentor, thank you. And I'm gonna whisper, you're welcome. But of course you won't hear me because I'll be pretty far away. So now, was this review helpful? I hope it was. I know it went a little bit longer than I usually do, but if you like it, didn't like it, subscribe anyway. Feed my niece to go to the movies and talk about it afterwards. And of course, you could always reach out to me on Twitter at The Real Mentor. Now, if you're having trouble, you're not sure what movie to watch, you're undecided, 2 or 3 get released, just relax. Don't panic. Remember. See you guys next week.